you know, obviously for most that know or some that don't, I'm Ryan at GPI. For those of you that don't follow our Team GPI group, I had posted a poll in there earlier in the week and was like, hey, here are some topics. What would you guys like to talk about on the next live stream? And the majority of people wanted to talk about fuel selection versus your combination, you know, compression ratio being a key factor of what your fuel selection is. And so I figured I would get some notes on different fuels that we run commonly, and we can kind of converse about, you know, why we pick the fuels we pick and what might be right for your setup. So we can get cracking. I think I'm ready to go solid roller. Yeah, solid roller is a good option. We'll talk about that. I know you wanted to talk about that. Maybe the next, I'll do another poll, but maybe the next live we can talk more in detail about hydraulic roller, solid roller, and general valve train technology and when and where and why we select what we select. So why is AG so fast? Well, he's part of the right team. Maybe we need to put him on some rocket fuel. He'd be really fast then. Okay, what would a full bolt-on high ram car run with 40 milled heads, no camo, and pump E? Just depends on what the car weighs. Really, it's hard to say. I mean, you can be really fast. I mean, you can get down, you know, in the mid sixes, you know, pretty easily. So, big question. Skylar has E85 NA. Skylar, are you talking about on like a pump gas or pump E, obviously? But are you talking about on like an LS or an LT platform? What are you asking about specifically? Which platform, I should say. If you tune for E85 and Rodney says, if you tune for E85 and have a nitrous standalone tank, is C16 better for use than E85? I believe C16 is a better fuel for nitrous than E85. I don't think C16 is really the best standalone fuel. There are other fuels, like VP makes a nitrous fuel. C23 is another fuel that's a good choice. You know, C16 is really a good fuel. It's leaded, obviously, 116 octane plus, really slow burning. So that's why a lot of people choose it for nitrous. You really have a pretty wide tuning window with the C16 and the standalone. I don't like any alcohol fuels with or ethanol stuff standalone with nitrous. It's fine if you're supplementing, you know, gasoline in the standalone and the base fuel of the car is E85. That's always worked really well, and we make big power doing that, but I don't like E85 for the nitrous fuel. I like something that has more detonation resistance than that, personally. That's my opinion anyways. Curious on both LS and LT. Yeah, so we'll just kind of generally touch on that a little bit, Skylar. So at stock compression, you know, like on an L99 car, 10-something to 1, on an NA setup, you're going to gain a little with E85, but it's going to be very small, like single-digit numbers, like maybe 5 or 6 horsepower or something small. So sometimes it's hard to justify the investment in the hardware and fuel system that you need to run E85 on such a basic setup that doesn't have a lot of cylinder pressure. In stock form, LT cars are 11.5 to 1. They have a pretty good bit of cylinder pressure from the factory, you know, and DI better utilizes the ethanol fuel. So in stock form or stock compression on a bolt-on car, it's not uncommon to see, you know, 22 to 26, 27 horsepower with E85 on the direct injected deal. Now, in my opinion, when you're talking about E85, why does it seem to be more beneficial on LT stuff than port injected LS stuff? Well, I believe personally that one of the factors, or one of the main factors, is you do not obstruct the air path with fuel on an LT because you put fuel directly in the combustion chamber. You know, it doesn't take up airspace in the port. Where on a port-injected engine like an LS, if you have to run 30% more fuel volume than you do on gasoline, well, there's that much more fuel volume that's taking up area that air could be. So generally, you know, alcohol fuels typically make more torque on port-injected and carbureted engines, and they don't always have as much horsepower benefit up top as they do torque, because ultimately you end up getting a little choked up on fuel in the port at some extent. And that's just a generalization. And that's, you're talking about factors like port size and camshaft. There's other factors that can certainly influence that. But anytime you're running port injected or carbureted stuff, that fuel is taking up volume in the airstream. And on a direct injected engine, it is not. So DI will always have an advantage running ethanol and methanol fuels versus LS because it doesn't sacrifice the airflow to run the fuel. Also, does VVT versus non-VVT have any to play in this? Not really. No. I mean, you're not really changing the cylinder pressure that much by moving the cam around. So that's really kind of a non-factor, Skylar. Is LT4 fuel system on C16 enough fuel for a nitrous setup? Ray, you're talking about like just running the whole car and the nitrous on C16? Probably so, depending on how much you're spraying. Yeah, probably so, right? Lonnie Holman Hernandez, I'll be emailing you back about my dyno issues. What a day. Some days are up and some are down, brother. I'm anxious to see what you got going on. Talk about vacuum in high compression and alternative fuels. Well, Tyrone, I mean, vacuum is basically a byproduct of how efficient the engine is. And regardless whether it's high compression or low compression, if you have a bunch of camshaft in there that has a bunch of overlap, and it's going to make the idle quality more poor along the way, obviously. And the more aggressive you get, the less vacuum it has. Well, then it can influence these street cars. Obviously, it can influence things like the brake feel. When you're sitting stationary, the brake is going to feel a little bit more mushy, such and such. And then alternative fuels, as far as that goes, Tyrone, what other fuels are you talking about? We're kind of already touching bases on E85. Of course, there's different grades of E85, different brands, and so on and so forth. And I'm willing to jump in and talk about what I have experience on those as you guys want to. So with no E85 on pump in Montana, do I recommend C85 or X85, L83 with drop-ins and pro-charged? Do you prefer race fuel or E? That's a good question. It depends on your fuel system. So if your fuel system limited, you probably can go further with race fuel than you can E. If you're not fuel system limited, I think you can possibly make a little bit more power with E. And my recommendation between C85 and X85 would be, between the two, I would say X85 for power adder stuff. An ethanol fuel we use a lot and keep in stock here that we like to run with our power adder builds is actually 1-ethanol R. And it actually has a higher octane rating than either of those fuels you mentioned. It makes good power, and it seems to give us the most latitude tuning window wise, really any of the ethanol based fuels that we've run in our power adder stuff. So I hope that helps. Ever done any back-to-back testing on MS109 versus Q16 on an NA setup? Actually, I have, Tyler, on the engine dyno. And this is my opinion and what I ran into. An engine typically that can run MS109 that doesn't really exceed that compression or cylinder pressure threshold to, kind of knock MS109 out of the equation. Usually MS109 makes more power because Q is so heavy. It's such a heavier fuel being leaded, and it's oxygenated. They're both oxygenated, actually, I'll tell you. MS109 is 9.32% oxygenated, and Q is 9.41. So they're really very similar as far as how much oxygenation they have. But what you have to consider, though, Tyler, is an engine that can use Q16 is going to be ultra high compression. In talking about NA stuff, ultra high compression in realms that MS109 really wouldn't qualify for. So typically, like when I engine dynoed, the engine we dynoed before, you're talking about this was a mild mid 700 horsepower flywheel engine that was probably 13 to 1, and it was fine with MS109. Q16 actually made a little less power. So that's the experience I have with it. But I ran Q16 on my little stock bottom end because it was over 15 to 1, and it needed that, and another good fuel to throw in the gasoline mix for NA stuff that, depending on your compression ratio, is C45. And I would say C45 makes more power than any of the NA fuels as long as you can use it. When you get to the ultra compression, the real big high cylinder pressure, Q16 is usually going to be the move. But if you can utilize C45, it's nasty. It's a good fuel. It makes more power than MS-109. And C45 is 13.57% oxygenated. So like another 4% oxygenation with C45. That's why it's so good at what it's good for. Roberto, CID heads, compression bump over stock right out of the box. And is there ever a time or application that you suggest running a stock ported milled over CID or prefer the cross section of that runner design? Or is the CID superior across the board, hands down, resources not being an issue? That's a really good question. So I know it's not on today's primary target, but I know a lot of people in here, kind of bounce and contemplate between stock heads or aftermarket heads. First off, the stock port is really larger than it needs to be. But you got to understand the factory runs a very small cam profile and they run a small valve in the head. Well, the CID heads, we still start our base head that we do 90% of the time or 95% of the time is still a 2-125 valve. Our cross section is smaller and, the airspeed, the velocity is better as a result. Another byproduct of that, the swirl in the chamber is better as a result, and that's why the heads yield more power. There's never really a situation where I would recommend a stock head over a CID. I think there are situations where the CID, the stock heads, like on a bigger cubic inch NA or a power adder setup, may make pretty close to the same power as the CID, but because now you have a combination that can use the larger port and is not affected by the slower velocity. But with that being said, you still have a stock head casting, and the stock head castings in comparison to the CID are just inferior. They're not super reliable or super consistent. You can run out of real estate really fast on a stock head when you're porting. There's just not a lot there to work with. So in my opinion, the CID head is going to be better for most applications, really any application. It's just a couple of scenarios where a factory head could get kind of close to what a CID head can do, but then you still have the durability aspect and it's, obviously the CID is a 6-bolt design and much heavier, much durable, thicker casting, heavy casting to work with. So that's what we find anyways. Plus, we can make more compression with the CID head than you can with the stock head unless you want to pop the seats out and, put thousands of dollars in welding and regrinding chambers and recutting seat registers and putting seats in and doing all that stuff. Like at that point, if you're going that exotic on a stock head, why? Why are you even spending that much money on a stock head? It just doesn't make sense. At what compression ratio does E85 start to make a noticeable power increase? That's a pretty good question. It's kind of going to be relative to the camshaft being used. So if you had a 12-to-1 engine and it had a real small cam like a SS1 or something like that, it would have some pop. It would have some cylinder pressure with that small cam. E85 would be pretty beneficial on that. If you had a 12-to-1 setup that had like our SS4 in it, it's still going to be beneficial, but probably not as beneficial, not as much power gain as it would with the smaller cam. So ultimately, static compression is the starting point of things. Now we know we have a static number. We need to look at the dynamic number, really. And the dynamic number is affected by camshaft largely, and also the stroke of the engine. The lower end of the engine obviously impacts that as well. But if you're talking about one given engine, whether it be a 416 or a stock bottom end or a Forge 376 or a 427, whatever. Static is the first part of the equation, but as you put more cam in it, it's going to bleed. When you close the intake valve later, it's going to drop cylinder pressure. So it's going to be less sensitive to the things that the small cams would be sensitive to. 10.5 to 1 engines with 220s, 230s cams on LS stuff, not going to see a huge benefit with the 85. Like I said, single digit stuff usually at best, usually not double digits. Where you're going to see the gain is where, that 12-to-1 probably plus range, where pump gas starts getting kind of sensitive and you start having to detune because you've got enough cylinder pressure with the cam and compression you've got. And usually for most people's cam and compression combo, that's going to be, you know, in the 230s range probably, and 12 to 1. You know, below that, gains really probably are a little less. On an LT, they're there everywhere. Like I said, LTs just pick up everywhere with the E85. Really regardless of compression. 415, 12.5 to 1, ported heads, high ram, 100 shot of nitrous. What fuel to run with standalone? Some people talked about this earlier. We chatted earlier. I mean, C16 is a common one people use. 100 shot, you don't really need a lot of fuel. Like, you don't really need a super heavy fuel, Joe. So like MS 109 or like VP 110 or anything like that would be perfectly fine, Joe, for the standalone on just 100 shot. You're not going to need a ton of fuel. Now, if you were spraying 2, 3, 400, obviously C16, C23, or one of the nitrous-specific fuels would be more ideal to run. Is R1 fuel worth it on full bolt-on versus pump E85? You talking about the, Robert, you're talking about, I assume, 1 Ethanol R. It's going to be small. You know, it's actually probably more like an X98. So you may get a little bit of benefit there because it's a little heavier in ethanol content versus most pump E85s. I would say it's very close to what C85 will do for you. Typically C85 is about 10 to 12 horsepower over pump E, depending on the pump E content. You know, if it's lower content, obviously those gains could be a little higher. But 1 Ethanol R would be similar to what you would see with C85. You know, C85 has some additives. Actually, if you look up the material and safety data sheet on it, it says it contains nitrocarbol, I think is how you pronounce it, which is the same thing that's in M5 fuel, which is, I'm pretty sure, a form of nitro, but I don't know. This is how BP classifies it, but C85 has some additives in it to make power. And the 1 Ethanol R obviously is a blend of something. There's less information that I have found out there about it, but I know that it's big octane, works really well. It's worked good. We've engine dynoed stuff with it. You know, it's very close to what you're going to do with C85. It should be worth a little bit over pump E. What package does GPI have for the C706? Really, we can do anything. You know, we don't have like, there are some companies that have like a stage 1 package or a X amount of horsepower designated package. Most of our customer builds don't want a cookie cutter build, and we don't really have a preset cookie cutter deal. So like, really we work more off of what your goals are, like how much power you want to make. If you have an ET goal for the car, then we kind of build off of that, Michael. I don't really have pre-configured, you know, packages. I mean, obviously we have some shelf cams, we have our ported head services, we have some go-to common options we use and parts we use, but no dedicated packages. What compression would a stock bore LT1B with 40 milled heads? Oh, I don't really know. I'd have to calculate it off the top of my head. Let me see what I got here. I may have some kind of reference here. Somebody said 1R, baby. Good fuel. Well, I'm waiting on my email to open up because I'm pretty sure I've got a compression chart in here. Here we go. Quick compression worksheet. Should be reasonably close. Tyrone says, wonder if that big boy, talking about the Goliath high pressure fuel pump, will add enough fuel on the top side for full methanol. Oh, it absolutely would, as long as we have an injector that will coincide with it. We need them to come out with an injector that will work at that kind of pressure, you know, whether it be 3 bar or whatever, you know, whatever pressure. We need injectors that will actually open at 3,000 plus PSI to be able to have that kind of flow capability on the injector side of things. But the pump certainly, I believe, would be enough on an NA deal. Looks like somewhere in the mid-12s, 12.6, 12.7 range, milled 40 with a stock gasket. Probably about 12.7 if you mill at 40. 416 high ram with CID heads. I'm sure you benefit more from C85, correct? Like I said earlier, C85 works good. It's usually worth in between 10 and 15 horsepower over pump E. So it works good for sure. if that's what you're referencing, would it be a benefit for C85 over Pump E? Then yeah, it would be a little bit of a benefit. But your tune will need changes for the C85. You got to run about 4 or 5% more fuel volume with it than you do with Pump E. Frank said about 14 to 1. What fuel would you recommend for me? All LT4 fuel system. Just bought an auxiliary from y'all as well. Well, so C85 or the 1 Ethanol R if you want to stay on E. What you can do for race days and set up a tune to do this is you having a fuel system with the aux pump at your power level and LT4 high side system to run about 3 gallons of C85 or X85 or whatever E85 of your choice, about 3 gallons of it mixed with 2 gallons of M5. You have fuel capability to be able to do that. And that's probably going to be worth 20, 30 horsepower and torque over just E85 alone. It's actually a pretty decent little bump in power with a little M5 mix in there. So you can do that. You can get away with that on your fuel system you have with the aux pump, Frank. But you just have to command the wide open throttle air fuel. Has to be richer with the methanol. So if you're looking at gas scale numbers, probably somewhere between 12.2, 12.4 range. And it may need a little less timing than what it runs on E85 alone, from my experience, from what we've done on the ones we've tuned. Would you run a CID head on a SBE engine if you plan to go stroker later and would like to reuse the head, both being spicy and A combos? Yeah, for sure. Two options. Our CID heads, even with the stock valve size, now, which we offer 2165 and 2200 valve sizes for the bigger cubic inch engines, the big bore engines. But I can tell you the 2125, the CID head we've been selling for the last few years has supported over 760 rear wheel, like real world numbers, no fluff, on the 85. That's the same heads that we run on the stop bottom and stuff. Depending on what the stroker setup is, if it's a big bore, like a 4185 bore deal, you would probably be better off with a 2165 valve version or even the 2200 version, depending on the RPM range you want to operate at. But it is possible to get the CID head in a configuration that would be good for both setups. It may just favor one versus the other a little bit. But I would still run the CIDs versus any stock head on both engines. Caesar's right. CT porting. CID head is always going to accelerate better down track. It's what people don't understand. I even had somebody, I spec'd a cam here a while back, not mentioning any names, but it even had me baffled a little bit. Put the cam in, made less power on the dyno. I'm like, this doesn't make sense. This should be better. I'm looking at the valve timing here. This should be better. And they went and did it on the draggy, and it was like 60 to 130 was almost a full second faster because it accelerated that much better. So sometimes, depending on the acceleration rate of the dyno, how much load it is on it, sometimes bad combinations can still make good horsepower on the dyno, but they won't necessarily accelerate at the track. Not always, but that can happen sometimes. It's all about feeding the engine. And sometimes, at the bottom of the gear, when you have a real big head port, real big lazy port that doesn't have good airspeed, it's going to be lazy. It's not going to accelerate good off the gear change if the head is out of whack. Said everybody in the chat don't laugh, but this car's my daily. I can't go big like y'all run. Do you think a full bolt-on LT2 SS1 stock ported head, stock converter LT car will run? What do I think it'll run in a quarter and eighth with drag pack? I'll factor the weight reduction later. So honestly, I feel like with stock converter, you're not going to see much benefit with the camshaft and heads ET wise. I think, let's say that combo would go full bolt-on. Let's say it would go 11 O's, depending on the weight. Maybe pick up 2 or 3 tenths, possibly, but it's all going to be from horsepower, basically from 100 foot out. With stock converter and the camshaft, it's not going to pick up anything down low. So it's all going to be on the mile per hour side of things. That would be what I would guess. I mean, if you're a full weight car with just a drag pack, cracking off in the 10s with that combo, high 10s, 11 O range would be pretty good because the car's not going to 60 foot real hard. So that would be pretty good for that setup. On port injection stuff, I've always heard you leave the intake port a little rough for fuel atomization, but on LT1 being DI, could you see any gains polishing the intake ports? if you read about that, and I like to read and research and kind of look at all the different opinions, and we even tried those dimpled ports that look like golf balls. I think there's a benefit to having texture in the port to direct the air. I'm not a head porter, but just looking at what we do when we're designing heads, looking in at what our stuff ends up like and what some of the challenges are, a lot of the magic's in the short turn of the head. So getting the air to follow the short turn and not shoot straight off that and hit the bowl is a good bit of making the head work. And I think some texture helps air follow the path you want it to follow versus being really smooth, even on a DI deal. I don't think that the ports being smooth are any benefit whatsoever. Maybe a detriment. Exhaust ports can be really smooth though, because you don't want carbon to stick to the exhaust port. So exhaust ports can be slicked up and polished up really good. What does it take for a A6 fit-in Camaro with factory, with stock compression, factory cast heads, SS3 to get a 10-second pass? Converter and like 3,600 pound race weight probably. It doesn't have to be anything really fancy. You just need a converter, plastic, rod mod intake and stuff on pump gas. I went in 2013, I went 1087 cam only. 1087 with cam and full bolt-ons with a converter. They had like 124 or something like that. Then I did ported heads and I went I changed cams and then I went to our SS4, which was the first cam I ever designed. And I went 1070s. And then I put ported heads on it and I went 1040s. 1040s pass did have race gas in it. The 1070s pass was on pump gas. 1070s and 1080s on pump gas. So really nothing fancy. I just had a converter, around a 4,000, 4,200 converter, and, cam setup. A little bit of weight reduction, seats out and stuff like that. About 3,600 pounds. Roberto, thanks for the detailed response. Last question. I'll stop bothering you. You're not bothering me. Do the CIDs bring your static compression to, say, 12.5 to 1 right out of the box without milling, plus or minus? Well, they're 55 cc's, so you're 4 cc's less, 6,000 per cc roughly. 4 cc's would be 24, so you're going to be about 12.2 out of the box. About 12.2 compression with the CIDs with a stock gasket out of the box. What compression point do you lose streetcar drivability LS or no effect? Really, as long as you have Pump E85 availability, like 60-something, 70% ethanol, pump grade stuff, you can run in the 14s, even 15 to 1 range if you have enough camshaft. It's the high compression, small cam stuff that creates a ton of cylinder pressure that'll get you more in trouble sooner than the big cam, big compression stuff, But you can run, we have several combos that are E85 dedicated, obviously. You can't run them on pump gas or wouldn't recommend you to, that are in the 14 to 1 range. Yeah, Andrew kind of followed me up on that. Compression is going to have a lot to do. Dynamic compression based on the cam. OEM LT1 heads milled 60, 28 gasket. What compression ratio am I looking at? What fuel? C85 or 1 Ethanol R. Either fuel, they're going to be pretty close to the same. I don't have a 28 gasket on my compression calc right here, but if you milled 60, that's 13.9. I think you get another 6 or 8 tenths with a 28 gasket, so you'll be in the upper 14 range, upper 14s. But consider then you're probably going to have to fly cut. Also with a 28 gasket, if you're running OEM heads like you are, the little dimple by the spark plug boss in the combustion chamber is going to have to be hand massaged down because it's going to touch the piston dome with 28 gaskets. So you have to clearance and check for things when you run a 28 gasket with factory heads. It's not just a one done thing. You need to check the clearance on stuff. You're tightening the quench up a lot, and that dome versus the factory head can have clearance issues when they're milled a lot. Easily resolvable, but just check that stuff. When switching from E to C85, does the Flex take care of that, or a new downloaded tune required? New tune. So it sees the ethanol percentage, but it's not going to be a huge change in ethanol percentage. C85 still only shows like 80% or something like that on a log. You need to basically, across the board, it's going to need about 4.5, roughly 4 or 5% added to the tune for C85. What compression is the cutoff to run a turbo and LS? Main fuel being E85. Well, if you're air-to-air intercooled, you don't have any meth injection or anything to cool intake charge, a lot of that's going to depend on the turbo, how much boost. But I can tell you, if you have meth injection, to help with charge temps, We have got 12.5 to 1 engines that are running, decent sized turbos that are making, in a 30 pound of boost range, somewhere around in there. It really depends on your turbo. If your turbo is not super efficient or on the small side, the compression bump can make the engine more efficient and really help you on your turbo build. But if you have turbo to spare and you have airflow left on the table with the turbo, it's just really not worth running as high of a compression. You still want some compression in it, but not that much. So you can get up there pretty good bit on compression, depending on what power level you're talking about. Yeah, Max 2.0 cam is still, it's kind of like an SS4, just a touch larger than an SS4. So I would probably stay in the 12.5 to 1 range on that cam, John. If we slid the cam out and changed the cam to something a little larger, we could certainly get away with 13 plus pretty easily. It would just need a little bit more cam to be pretty sensible. Track equals real dyno. That's absolutely correct. Had a well-known cylinder head guy tell me he's seen a set of heads not do well on the bench but rocked on the engine. Absolutely. Case in point, our CID heads on the flow bench really don't flow any more than the stock ported heads. But we put them on the engine and they make way more power and the cars run substantially better. You're talking 20-something plus horsepower better. And it doesn't show you a single thing on the flow bench. It's just like a dyno, the numbers are what they are, but you still have to go test the stuff. It's a good baseline. It's good data to have. So if we make a change, then we can kind of benchmark that versus what we do know, but that doesn't always guarantee a successful product or package. Don't put the carriage before the horse. Converter, then cam. Just your 2 cents. I don't disagree. I think a converter on a bolt-on car is a better running setup than a cammed car with stock converter. I completely agree. It's just some people aren't that serious and they want the cam sound and they run it a little bit, but they're not super, super serious about it. So I understand both sides of it, but from a performance side of things, converter first, then the cam. My recommendation. Fuel for heads cam, SBE LS3 with a radium fuel system running 2340 pumps. 1 pump runs and other would need to be wired up. Well, it depends on what you got for injectors, Zach. E85 obviously would be a good fuel. And I don't know your compression of your engine, but on a port injected deal, it sounds like you got a pretty decent amount of fuel pump. You might could even get away with running methanol, M1 or M5 possibly. But you would need basically double the injector that you need on pump gas if you want to run methanol. So there's a ton of fuel system needed, well beyond what you need for E85 to run methanol. But there would be more power probably on your setup with the methanol than E85. Yep, I think that term is called laminar flow or something to that effect. Like I said, not a cylinder head porter, but I know just enough to be dangerous. Pleading DOD to lead on L83, flex fuel with 20,000, send injectors out for rebuild, internal filters extremely dirty. Would you consider adding inline filtration for E85? No, I wouldn't. I don't think that there's any more. Actually, I think pump gas sitting probably it can be as bad as E85 sitting around. But any fuel when it sits around is going to have the possibility for setting up, gasoline especially gumming up. Would more filtration hurt? Probably not, but I don't know that it would really help the cause either. The filter is so fine on those the in-tank pumps. It's hard to imagine that something got past the filter through the pump and into the injectors. It's almost like the injector filters being clogged is from fuel contamination from something within the system after the fuel pump, whether fuel sitting there for a long time or what. Unless he's got an aftermarket intake pump that doesn't have as good as filtration. I guess you'd really have to dig into it a little deeper. Let's see, 10-4, we got to figure out how to get weight out of the car on full weight. Yeah, just got to get a little weight out of there on the fifth gen deal to get that thing where you want it to be. You get 14.2-1, keep in mind SBE LT1, compression calcs, the piston is 12 below deck. That's about the worst case scenario, Andrew. A lot of times they're about 7 or 8. Then you go add in fly cuts, you're going to add volume. So there are considerations. A lot of times people don't have quite as much compression ratio as they think they do when they fly cut because they don't take into account they added volume back with a valve relief. How's the Ordo polishing combustion chambers? Again, I don't I personally don't know that there's any benefit. I've never seen any benefit with that personally. I think sometimes guys that do that stuff are looking for some kind of an Easter egg. They're looking for something that's going to help, that's easy like that. But really what it comes down to is just it needs to be shaped properly and sized properly on the ports and the chamber. The chamber needs to be shaped properly, all the way down to the valve job in the seats. The air has to come off the seat and into the combustion chamber. It has to be shaped properly. It doesn't matter what finish you have on it if it's not built properly to start with, 100%. Is there a situation where it might need to run lines from both ports to a T-fitting? What are you talking about, Tyrone? On your setup for like brake vacuum, is that what you're talking about? How much nitrous can I run on an L83 Stage 3 high lift safely? Nitrous? Safely? None. I say that because it's usually not the nitrous that kills it. It's either the tune-up or hardware failure or electronics. It's anything but the nitrous usually. We've had guys spray 100, 150, but just keep in mind, LT pistons are not as durable as LS pistons. So if you do rattle it with the tune-up or bad fuel or anything that causes the engine to detonate a little bit, it's going to break the piston. And when it breaks the piston, you're down for repairs. That's why we created the drop-in pistons for the L83s, LT1s, and such, because they're just not as durable. Can you do it for a little while? Yeah. In a perfect world where there's no bad things that happen, sure. But if you get some bad fuel, tuner misses a tune-up, or maybe your tune-up was done and it was 60 degrees outside, and then it gets down, you make passes and it's 30 degrees outside and the engine's a little leaner or something. There are 1,000 things that can cause an engine to get aggravated just enough to detonate, and an LT piston will not. It will not tolerate it. LT4 will. LT4s are badass, but LT1s and L83s and L86s, nah. Nope. Side note, what's the off speed on a 6F? 5,500-ish? Yeah, I would say 52 to 5,500-ish, depending on the weight of the car. Would you do a converter first on a bolt-on LT car? Yes, I would, William. I would 100% do the converter first and do enough converter for the cam in the future. The bolt-on setup will not suffer from it. It will only make it better. 100%, I promise you. 12.8 would be the upper limit on pump gas. Can go north of 14.1 on full. Yeah, it's true, Andrew. Usually with how we spec cams, that's absolutely about right. If a guy wanted me to make a cam to run 14-1 on pump gas, I could do it. It would just be an absolute turd because I'd have to bleed that cylinder pressure off. Converter. I've gotten heads from competitors versus y'all. CID and the competition's heads flowed worse than stock, and the CID aligned with y'all's flow numbers. Yeah, happens sometimes, Benches can vary, and sometimes, stuff can get fluffed. Depends on how the bench is set up. That's why I try to always benchmark and just look at what we're doing versus the other things we're doing. Because I don't really care what anybody else is doing. Nothing anybody else is doing is driving me to do anything. That's not my motivation. My motivation is for us to build more badass products and try to be better than the products we already have. But yeah, in regards to comparing benches, you get some high ones out there, that's for sure. It's just like the 1320 video correction factors on dynos, where you 50, 100 horsepower up, and it goes, you got a 650 wheel horse NA car that goes out and runs, 950s or something. It just doesn't even, or 1050s, whatever, it just doesn't even make sense. So I don't doubt it. No problem, William. It's the same way on the 5th gen stuff, really. The gearing, which you don't have gearing options on a 6th gen because of how the differentials are built, but converter, bolt-ons, E85, getting all that stuff out of the way, that is a better performing combo than a stock converter with a camshaft. If performance is your number one goal and sound isn't, Say his name, bro. Last question. Any converter issues on 10 speeds when going aftermarket? For the most part, not. I mean, there's been some issues here and there, but nothing that's super common. No. I mean, but there's issues sometimes with 8-speed and 6-speed stuff too. Most of those issues come back to tuning issues that you see. Very rarely, very, very rarely will you have an actual hardware issue. Brent, what's up? I had a question that's kind of off topic. Any plans to do more class racing with Corey's car? Not really. That car is kind of like my car. It was in kind of no man's land. You know, not really fast enough to run with some of the index, like mean street stuff, and too fast for any of the rest of the NA guys to want to mess with him. So it's kind of hard. You know, even if the car goes what I think it's going to go, it should be a little faster than my car was. But, you know, that range, there's just not a lot of index stuff. And I don't like having to slow a car down. I don't want to slow an NA car down to run 550 or whatever. You know, it's just not interesting. But I like the heads-up stuff better. But, I mean, it's fast enough to get out there and run with some of the power adder cars too. But, you know, the problem is going to be, we're going to show times with the car, and some people aren't going to want to race because we're going to show times, and they, you know, if they're a grudge guy, you know, so whatever. And then none of the rest of the guys that show times, I mean, there's no NA guys, I don't think, that are out there currently with late model stuff that are going to want to run. You know, just they're going to have excuses about how the car sits and everything, you know, but, you know, it is what it is, I guess. Yeah, World Cup would be fun. You know, they just they slowed the class down. We set the domestic record in World Cup all motor. The very first year Ronnie Hackleton's car was in it, we went 9:10 or 9:11, and there's not been a domestic car, I don't believe, still yet to this day go faster. They changed the rules and took power out of the cars, took power out of the combos where the LS stuff couldn't run anything but basically looks like the 525 crate motor. I don't know. The rules are kind of, they're pretty complicated. You know, it's very, very in-depth. But, yeah, it would be fun to have him in there. I don't think you'd need to tee it on the brake vacuum, Tyrone. What horsepower level and ET are capable with the LS3 track attack kit? I know varies with compression and cylinder head. It's hard to say. 11s to 9s. You know, a light car can get in the 9s. A heavy car is going to be closer to the upper 10s, you know, low 11 range. Ryan, a few of us have some interest in SBE LT1 forced induction as shown on the poll. Could you share some of your personal experiences with these setups? Well, I mean, I've had some, you know, done power adder stuff. The first LT car we ever did, I cammed it, and we did a D1 SC on a C7, and it's still running to this day, but it's only 7 pounds of boost or so. Like I was saying earlier in reference to another question, really it comes down to you can do it, and it's fine until it's not. And the until it's not can be from a lot of factors, you know, whether it's, you know, a change in climate, elevation that throws something off with a tune-up, causes a little detonation, boom, all of a sudden you busted a piston. Got too aggressive with a tune-up, rattled it, busted a piston. Whatever aggravates that lower end is guaranteed it's gonna break a piston at some point in the event of a rogue event. But I just, you know, a lot of these people are doing cams and stuff when they're doing forced induction. So it didn't make sense to me to not do drop-ins on a lot of that stuff because you've already got the engine down that far. And if you're running a forced induction setup, what is another couple grand in parts to have something that's a lot more durable? If you're just chasing a number to say you're stop bottom end chasing a number, I get it. But for us, you know, we have to stand behind, or we do stand behind what we put together. And if we tell you a combo is going to be durable and we're putting our name on it, I don't want to have issues with it. So that's the main reason. We always wanted to do something that was super durable, that made sense for most people. And I wish the LT lower ends were as durable as the LSs were, because we'd push them up 800-900 horsepower, and I wouldn't sweat about it because we've done that. So, hey, I like the NA stuff. I'm all about NA stuff. Everybody knows I'm all about NA stuff. Oh, Andrew was saying it really depends on other variables. Kind of like I was saying on the 5th-gen car. What's the ET capability? On the port injection plates, have you tried the DSX plates yet? I ask because they use a different injector. I would rather use a standard style than the extended tip injectors. I haven't used the DSX plates yet. We've used too high PSI, and we made a set of our own plates a couple of years ago and put on a customer's car before anybody else was making plates. And, we used a standard EV6 style injector on ours as well. But I don't think in a power adder application, Anthony, that it's going to matter too much about the spray pattern. You're essentially only using them at wide open throttle, so I don't really see where it's going to have a lot of impact at wide open throttle with any of the plates or any of the injector styles, personally. What happened to Ben being such a tragedy, bro? We got to start taking safety serious as we continue to get faster, everyone. I completely agree. Look, when I put my fiberglass doors on my car, back in 2018 or 19, whenever I was starting the last build on the car, instantly, as soon as I put it on the car, I'm like, there's nothing here. Like, I'm not running this car again until I get a cage put in it, which, led me down the rabbit hole of putting a lot more cage in it than I really needed for what I was doing. But I was like, I'm going to buy once, cry once, and I've got enough car to do anything I want to do in the future. But yeah, at a minimum, man, roll bar, something, harness, shoulder belts, at least a dadgum harness bar to be able to put a good seatbelt where you're not wearing a lap belt and stuff. And that's, Corey's car back when Brady owned it. I hit a slick spot out there at Memphis one night with it and spun it around the track. It's the only accident I've ever had in a car, ever, on the highway or at the track. And I nosed it into the wall. It spun around on me and hit the sliding sideways and hit the nose of the wall on the passenger side and then hit the rear quarter. And I'm glad it happened on the short end of the track rather than on the big end of the track, So, yeah, it's a very tragic deal. My thoughts and prayers go out to all those guys and their families, because nobody wants to have to go through that. That's a rough deal, and safety needs to be in everybody's mind. It really does. You only get one chance, man. You only get one life, and I know we're all reckless when we're younger, we're wilder, and we still carry that. I still carry a little bit of that as I've gotten older, but I'm a lot more thoughtful about stuff like that too now. But, ultimately we all chase the adrenaline rush, right? That's what we're after. But to be able to experience that stuff, we need to be a little bit more thoughtful about stuff. It wouldn't hurt for everybody to have safety on their mind, for sure. No fault to anyone. I've made tons of passes in cars with a lap belt on and stuff, and knowing that, I probably shouldn't, so, yeah, safety's, never let anybody tell you, oh, you don't have a street car because you got a cage. No, I just have safety on my mind. I can still drive my stuff, whatever. Just, be sensible about stuff, guys. Take care of yourself for sure. Our average turnaround time for porting heads right now, not as good as I'd like for it to be, Antonio, but it's, we've streamlined some processes. I've got another person added, and I'm hoping in the next few weeks to have really knocked a dent in our timeline. I would say right now, probably it's been about 4 to 6 weeks, depending on what it is, Antonio. But I want to get that down. I want to get that down in half. So we'd love to earn your business if we can. Anthony, we're making 700 here in Colorado with 8 pounds, made 11 pounds one night, and then Ringlands didn't like it. Yes, that's what I'm talking about. You know, we run into this a lot. You know, climate change, elevation change can throw a perfectly good running tune-up off because if the engine's never been operated and tuned and acquired that data in that environment, you don't have anything to go off of, right? Agree, Andrew. I agree. You know, Brent, I mean, I've tried this before. I mean, uh, it, the foot brake power adder guys are too fast for us now, but I mean, we're close enough. We'll be close enough to try something. You know, it's just it does suck with a car being in no man's land like that though, because there's just not other fast NA cars like that for the most part. There may be something that I don't know about, but usually have my eyes peeled on what's going on out there with NA stuff, and I just haven't seen a lot that's in that realm or any really. 50 pounds ain't gonna hurt you, dude. That's not gonna bother it. 6L80 thermostat bypass, 3600, 3800. I have an issue with sometimes downshifts hard. When giving very little throttle, feels like truck is shrugging. Any thought on what it might be? I mean, Antonio, it could be something with the tuning and the different converter. It may need shift timing or shift pressures touched up on the downshifts with your setup. I would think it would be something more tune related. If not tune related, it could be something actually mechanical within the transmission. Yeah. Yeah, Brandon had the oil cooler hose split open on his car at the track during the pass too. No bueno. Yeah, another guy. And Anthony also had another issue. So, well, guys, I think I've reached the end of the comments here. We've been about an hour in and talked about some fuels. Surprised nobody brought up M5, but that's a good option for guys that have fuel system to run it because of the additives in it. It makes really good power, but you need about 50% of the fuel, 50% more fuel system than E85, or versus about double the fuel system of what you need on pump gas if you want to run M5. So, anyways. Well, guys, I appreciate you coming in and discussing with me, talking. And I'll do a poll. I'll try to do a poll probably tomorrow or Friday with some more topics and kind of let you guys be in control of what we discuss in here in our little Q&A discussions. So thank you guys for tuning in. I appreciate everybody. And if you don't mind, check out the link tagged in the video. It's our Gapping People Intentionally shirts that just released today. They are on the website and available for purchase. And also, do me a big favor, our YouTube channel. I want to grow that thing. I want to start putting some long-form content, more long-form content out. So go subscribe to our YouTube channel. Interact with us on there. Comment on there. We'll answer your questions. Anything that we can do to help grow that, I would love that. Like, subscribe, and share, man. We appreciate you guys. We couldn't do what we do without you. Tune in next time. Thanks.